hold on. Restart my thought here. Your cat literally looks like mine, but also obviously acts like mine. Now, is your cat super young?
He is, yeah. I think he's like 2 or 3.
Okay. And have you had it since it was like a kitten, basically?
It's actually we share a house with a friend of ours, and it was her cat. And
Mhm.
we started living in a garden apartment that's in the lower half of the house. And then he just started spending all of his time with us. So, and then he bullies her dog. So we've just kind of like assumed like when we move out of here in a little while, like we're just going to have to take him with us.
Right.
So he got adopted and then he's been adopted by someone else.
Sure. Very cool. Well,
You are such a
how you
dork.
been, man? I know we've been chatting back and forth, but we've been basically trading messages because, of course, we're researching for our, next podcast, plugging away at that. But how you been since the last time we chatted?
Good. We were both in Michigan since the last time we chatted.
I was gonna say, rolling up some Symponia Farms right now, the Mandarin Skittles. So
You're like a brand ambassador.
yeah, yeah. No, I'm just trying to, plug.
Oh no,
If
they're a great shop. I support plugging them.
Yeah, yeah. So they, just for folks that are listening, they're a disabled veteran owned and operated shop in Michigan. And the reason I, am even talking about them right now is because there's not any stores like this that you can support in Illinois.
Mm-mm.
So,
I even love that they're like I mean the when I was talking to the guy, he said they gave up on the wholesale market, like they only sell stuff from their shop. And I just kind of love how they're branding. Like their branding would be like if I was branding a cannabis company. Like it's nothing special, and I think part of that is just they expect the experience and the weed to actually speak for itself.
yeah. Yeah. And I feel like I don't know, I think you said this. Do you think that's the kind of the future of cannabis, like they're vertically integrated. They're really just
Some of
trying
it.
to yeah.
I mean, well, because if you think about it, with everyone complaining about like the wholesale price of weed over there at least, and they're saying like, oh, it's hard for companies to survive. If they're only selling, hey, Claude, go away. If they're only selling from their shop and they're selling ounces for like $100 roughly, they're still making like 2,800 a pound. Or no, that would be 1,600 a pound, which is like pretty good. It's certainly better than like, you hear in Colorado that people are buying weed for like $600 a pound on like a wholesale market. So
600 for a pound. That's fucking crazy because that's the price that people pay for like 2 ounces here. you know?
well, yeah. Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, that might be very recently that that's gotten that low, but that was something I heard today was that
hmm
some people were buying pounds out there for like 600 something dollars.
Yeah, no, I've heard the exact same thing. And do you remember though? I feel like in that report they said something about like what it was when it started. Do you remember what it was when it started? I don't. I'm not pop quizzing you right now. I'm honestly
No,
asking
but
you.
I would assume it was like 4,000 or something like that.
Right. That's what I felt like, but I didn't want to say like yeah, like because I feel like in Illinois, isn't it like 3,500 or at least at one point it was like 3,500 or 4,000. Maybe it was even 5,000. I don't know.
At
I
one
feel like
point, yeah,
going
I
in.
know I know it's fallen, but I remember like some report I saw put out, it's like 20%, like retail prices have gone down 20% in a year, but wholesale prices have only fallen like 7%.
Mm,
So it's just like, who's actually taking the most of the hit would be people who are opening dispensaries or own dispensaries.
yeah. And I was gonna see if I could pull this up. You remember somebody posted on Illinois trees the wholesale prices. I thought that was kind of cool.
It was really interesting because those are actually worse. Like you could go stock up in Michigan retail prices and have better margins than someone that's paying wholesale prices here in Illinois.
Right. Yeah, I'll see if I can find that and pull that up. But yeah, yeah. So I mean, like I say, I don't know much about this company just yet. I do plan to interview them. They said they'd be up for an interview and It's really cool just because the grow is all in sight. You can see the product, and it's fucking $100 for an ounce. So I mean, I was like, well, it didn't really feel like a huge um leap to sample some. So just got a few
Oh no.
ounces. And
I mean, at that price, like, sometimes when you go into a shop blind and you don't have any experience there, if you're paying $100 for an ounce, or maybe even less now, um, even if that's like a gamble that didn't turn out in your favor, like just make it into some edibles or something. Like at that price, I mean, you get a couple bad prepackaged ounces. I think
yeah.
that's the best you could expect.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I can't find the post I was looking for right now, but I like to show things like this. This is a product that is on sale in Illinois right now. I don't know that this exact strain is on sale by any means, but here we go. We're looking at a Cresco product for people that are listening right now. And in Illinois, well, I'll look up the price here in a second, but in Michigan, it's $75 for an ounce of some flour, some Cresco flour, $10 for an eighth, mind you.
So if you're going over to Michigan, do yourself a favor and don't buy Cresco.
Yeah, oh yeah. I'm not saying by Cresco the point I'm
No,
trying
I
to
know, I
make.
know what you're
Yeah,
demonstrating. Yeah.
yeah. You get it. You get it.
I mean, there's a
It's
couple companies that are over there, like Ascend is over there. Um, Curaleaf is over there.
well, it kind of proves our
Cresco.
point, that we've been saying,
I
which
think Forefront is over there too.
yeah, I think they are actually. Yeah, you're right. But I was gonna pull up a Sunnyside menu, but it kind of like proves our point with regard to pricing. Like you see a company that is active in Illinois, and I mean by all means is the same product, and they're offering it at a lower price. Not because I don't know, maybe of course there are other factors at play, but I would say the main contributor to the price point in Michigan is the fact that they're not going to be able to sell. Here, I'm about to show the menu for a dispensary. I just looked up Sunnyside. This is one for Champaign, Illinois. Um, $55 for an eighth, you know? And I'm talking just for context, if you're so high that you already forgot, they were selling them for 15, 10 to $18 for an eighth. The same company in Michigan. And then you remember I was saying it was $75 for an ounce of flour. It costs $60
Hmm.
for 7 grams of shake. So
Yeah, shake.
it's
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, it's interesting too because prices are one of the main things you can bitch about in Illinois, like prices and taxes. But even if prices and taxes were reasonable and cheap, and I think I said this before, it's like if we're still stuck with the same number of few options, like that's not a real improvement.
mm-hmm.
I mean, that's some improvement for consumers, but like you still don't really have a choice.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, hey man, what are you smoking on this fine evening?
I am smoking stuff from that shop I told you about that's right across the street from Symphonia Farms.
Okay. Is
So
it
we're both
a
smoking
shop
we're
that
both smoking Battle Creek weed.
okay, cool. Is it a shop that shall not be named, or are they like
Oh no,
cool?
no, it's called Cunningham's.
Okay.
I think they just opened in like August or September. But the cool thing about it was you could actually see their grow room from their
Oh yeah, you
uh,
mentioned that. Yeah.
retail space, which was interesting. I've never seen anyone do that before.
Yeah. I think I've only seen somebody do that once, and it was like in Colorado. But it's a definitely a cool touch. I mean, because
Hmm.
most people have never even seen, the cannabis plant, you know. So
Well, and I just love the idea of like buying from the people who grow it. That's one of the things Shailene Title talks about not wanting vertical integration. But I feel like there should be some exception if you're like single site,
mm,
or maybe, you're allowed to have two or three of them, but like uh I just love that. I love the ability to like potentially run into the guy who's the grower at the shop. and be like, hey, you know, like I would, because I was actually talking to that guy at Symphonia Farms. I think you ran into him too, because we were
Yeah.
literally there the same day within an hour of each other.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I was telling him that I loved the critical hog that they had. And he was saying that he had kind of like gotten rid of it because there was a larger company over there that had given that strain kind of a shitty name. Like they were trying to shop around this critical hog that was really terrible.
Mm.
Um, but he was saying that a bunch of people had been coming and telling him that they really liked it. And I mean, they're not wholesaling anymore. So if they can sell it from the shop, he'll grow it. So I think he was like, yeah, I'll try to get those seeds again and see what I can do.
Yeah. You bring up a good point, and I'd be interested to hear what yeah, Shalene, like what her perspective would be on that, because he said something that to me I didn't even think about it until you just brought up Shalene right now. He was saying that because it's such a race to the bottom in Michigan, and he even mentioned that, several other stores have resorted to other techniques to cut the cost, right? So that includes, you know, sourcing black market cannabis or legacy market cannabis. How they do this, I don't know, but apparently they do this, and
I've heard it's with distillate is what they run into a lot.
oh,
It's
interesting.
like they'll producers will take a certain amount of flour and then they'll say they got a certain amount of distillate from it, but that distillate is like inflated by stuff they're sourcing from like out of state. And I heard this on, I don't remember if it was like J House Cabbage or Medical Mondays, but it was someone talking about how someone was like literally driving around the state to different dispensaries or cultivators trying to like sell out of a van, like probably someone from somewhere out west or something.
Yeah, so I mean, when you're competing with somebody like that, um what else are you to do? This was the argument he laid out for me, and I felt like it was convincing. He's like, when you're competing with somebody like that, that's not even playing by the same rules, frankly, what else are you to do than to just cut competition out of the equation and become vertically integrated, so that you just rely on yourself.
Yeah. And kind of do your own thing.
Yeah. And I was like, that's kind of convincing. I wonder though how we, like, do you recall exactly, like, I know that I'm trying to like think about how I would substantiate what Shalene's concerns were with regard to vertical
Well, I think
integration,
because if you have
or explain rather. Do you
well, because
remember
I
what
think
they
the
were?
worry is if you like the same case you could make for why being vertically integrated is great for a small business, you could say that gives large operators an unfair advantage because
Right. I
they're,
thought, yeah,
you
gotcha.
know. So I could see like, because what is it like Budweiser? Because that exists in the beer industry or in liquor too. It's like Budweiser and Schlitz, like they used to have those like tide houses where it was like a bar that was like owned by, like you'll see them like with little old signs that say like Schlitz and it was like a tavern that was owned by the beer company.
Hmm.
So at some point they didn't allow that, and then you had to have distributors, and that's kind of how, I don't know this fully, but like it seems like if you're like a Budweiser or a bigger company, you're not allowed to sell directly to the public. You have to go through a distributor. But like I think I used them as an example before. There's like two breweries down the street from us that don't distribute their beer anywhere but on site, and they're allowed to be vertically integrated.
Right. Right. That's what I think of when I think of these little operations. It's something like that you see all over the state of Illinois. It sounds like you just described like a craft brewery, where
Mm-hmm.
you're basically sitting in and drinking where they are currently brewing beer. Is that the place? Like, I don't know about
Well,
you, but
right, yeah.
place I've
Mm-hmm.
been, there's like literally big ass fucking machinery. Like, it's not obtrusive by any means, but it's like part of the aesthetic, is the fact that you're literally sitting in their brewery drinking their
Well,
beer.
and it's interesting because places like that didn't really exist. Like when I first started drinking, I can't. I mean, there might have been there was like a place like Goose Island in Chicago would have been like what that is. It was like a more independent brewery, but there weren't like dozens of them all over the place, like all making their own beer on site and selling it to people. It's like people's tastes had to kind of there had to be like that craft beer explosion where like people all of a sudden were super interested in it and were looking for something different and something more quality. I don't remember
Yeah.
where I was going with that, but
Well, maybe just to spin it and to kind of validate what you were saying, you brought up thoughts that I forgot were in my head, which is that I remember when Vegas, I think that's the state I'm thinking of, when Vegas first legalized it, like the alcohol industry basically lobbied super hard so that they
oh
had to
yeah.
be the distributors, just like you're talking about, where it's like, nah, you can't deliver it straight to the dispensary. So it was actually really silly. And in one circumstance, I remember it was like a Vice special, and they were showing that literally it was a grow attached to a dispensary, just like
Hmm.
Symponia. But what the alcohol distributor had to come and do, he literally came in, he's got a clipboard, he takes their pallet jack that they already loaded up, pulls it down the hallway. Like he looks at the clipboard first, right? Pulls the pallet jack down the hallway and then checks everything off, makes the signatures. And then he's like, all right, you're good. He basically just has to move it down the hallway.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I remember seeing that. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
funny.
So to
Well,
your
I mean,
point,
technically, I mean, that's kind of what I feel like that the transporter license in Illinois is almost kind of like that. It's like really there's no reason cultivators shouldn't just be able to transport their own stuff. Like that
yeah.
transport license just seems like kind of like inventing another middleman,
Hmm.
which, in turn will just inflate the cost of things for
Yeah.
consumers.
And we'll be talking about this in a much deeper dive in our history episode, part 2. By the way, if folks are listening right now and haven't heard part 1, I believe it's episode 232. And we published this document that has like citations for everything that we talked about in that episode. You can listen to it for free. You can download it for free wherever you listen to podcasts, episode number 232. It's a good one. We start at the beginning of, you know, Illinois cannabis in 1978, believe it or not. And we work our ways all the way up to the, day one of adult use sales. So if you want to check out that episode, it's super good. And most importantly, we lay out how you can trace political contributions from these cannabis companies to your elected officials. And, you know, it's really interesting. You sit there and you wonder why there's not action. And it's like, when you look at things like that, you're left to wonder like, or you start to wonder like, oh, maybe it's not a coincidence that these people aren't taking action if they're being paid by people that benefit from them not taking action, right? You have to wonder. So check out episode number 232. But what I wanted to ask you about with regard to transportation license, I wanted to sneak that plug in there. Um, what do you think about what JB Pritzker said the other day with regard to being open to delivery? I know, of course, that requires a bill to be drafted, which isn't going to happen until next
Yeah, I mean, I think he was just
session and
answering a
such.
question and then like the press just interpreted that as him endorsing it.
Yeah, I did
It's
like that
like,
some outlets, made sure to say that he said he was open to it, but didn't necessarily like endorse it, because that's absolutely true. He was just like, yeah, I mean, I've heard about it in other states, and if you can make sure that it's a transaction just like this, in other words, the individual, the 21-year-old individual who orders the cannabis receives that cannabis with no issues. I don't see why we couldn't do that. That's what he said, which is like the most neutral thing. My thing is, here's my question. I was thinking about this as I'm doing research for part 2. They did those emergency rules in COVID where they could do curbside pickup. Like what's the limit to emergency rules? Like what
yeah, yeah, it would be interesting. And I mean, if they tried it, if anyone would even sue them to try to stop it, I don't know. Like, depends who they were letting do it, I guess.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect that anytime soon, though.
But again, it just seems like when they need something to happen, they can make it happen. So like, God damn it, I just forgot what I even just said. But oh yeah, the curbside thing. Like that was unthinkable before. No, you can't take a product that has, that you can't have that arrangement, but somehow they come up with a way, a protocol, and they make
Do
it
they
happen.
still do they still do curbside?
That's a good question. there were some this year still doing it, but I don't know that any places still do it. And I do know that it was a or at least from my research, the first little notice that went out that I saw did say it was temporary. But they
Yeah, because
obviously
I was
must have
gonna say
extended
I
it a
just
few
figured
times.
companies wouldn't want their employees like outside because like
Yeah,
I don't know in the state like weed still have. I mean, not that even in states where it's more plentiful, they don't rob dispensaries. But like here, it's still like so scarce and has such a higher value than other states. I feel like there is still incentive to just rob people for the product.
true. I was about to say that it's pretty foolproof, but you actually make a good point, because what I was thinking about is like, I mean, you give them the cash first and then they bring out the product, but you're right that somebody bringing out the product is still
It's just
like somebody could
liability.
still,
Yeah.
exactly, liability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that like they'd be seriously worried about it, but just like
Yeah.
it could happen.
Right. Yeah. That's why I'm like, that what is it? There's one dispensary. We don't even have to name it. I think I know which one it is. I think it's the one that we did the special report on. Has a drive-through. The one that just treats dead bodies, apparently, allegedly, like
Oh,
puddles.
they have a
Um,
drive-through.
maybe it's not them. One of them does though.
I went through a drive-through in Michigan for the first time like a couple months ago, and it was an old like bank
Uh-huh.
one. It was just really weird.
Did they have the thing where you you put your money in and it sucks up and then they put the weed down and it comes through the tube?
I think there was like in the other lane, but I was the closest lane, like right next to the window, so it was just like a little thing that like slid out and then like back in. I mean, it's
Right.
great for I mean, it's like building dispensaries in former banks is like a great security feature, I would guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. You got the vault already built in and stuff. All the
Hmm.
camera, or at least the infrastructure for the cameras there.
Because that isn't, yeah, that is. I saw one by Detroit too once. That also was like an old bank that had a drive-through, but I was too scared to use the drive-through because I'd never done it before.
Yeah. Point is, folks, take a trip to Michigan. It's interesting when you go to a state that actually embraces legalization. That's, pretty close. Like when you get there, there's fucking there's billboards everywhere. There are so many different dispensaries. Definitely do your research before you go. Look out for small cannabis farms like the ones we've mentioned so far. There are definitely lists to avoid. And Phil, would you agree that the best, if you're like trying to really quickly look for a list to avoid, is Google like MCMA companies that are on the MCMA? Or what do you
Yeah, I
think?
would just Google like MCMA boycott list and then add every company in Illinois on there.
There you go. Yep. Yep. So yeah, that's
There's
concise.
so many
Perfect.
options at this point. It is just not hard to find people that aren't lobbying to fuck people over left and right, at least over there.
Yeah, and let's be very clear for folks that haven't checked out episode 232. You should. What we mean by that is that why don't you take it? What when you said that people that lobbied against us and fucked us. Here you go. I'll throw you
Oh,
a
well,
softball. What'd they do?
just, anyone who was part of the Medical Cannabis Alliance of Illinois, now the Cannabis Business Association, did lobby and continues to lobby for limited licensing, for a restricted market, and for, they certainly lobbied against home grow to start, and they certainly don't support it now. They don't actively support it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they'll
And
always
I'm
say like, "Oh, we don't advocate against that anymore." And it's like, "Yeah, but you're selling weed and you're not doing anything to advocate to further decriminalize it."
right. And that's
And
an
like
issue.
we would hear about it if you were,
Hmm.
because it'd be so heartening to hear that.
Exactly. I was trying to find the article. I know it's that we're not diving into this yet, but I just added an article earlier just to back up. I don't want to that's the cool thing about episode 232. There's another plug for it. We have citations for just about everything we say. But one of the things we just said, I do have a citation for, and if I can't find it right now, we'll return to it in the episode. I can promise you that. But there's an article that specifically talks about the Cannabis Business Association of Illinois lobbying against legislation that many social equity applicants were pushing for. And I believe that is what spawned the meme that you made, which is the bus, you know, coming. I'm trying to find the article, but it's crazy, when you look back through history. Some of it seems so long ago, and some of it seems like, oh yeah, it seems like yesterday, you know?
Well, it has been I mean, you think about it, it's been like, well, it's been 3 years, but like, in summer it'll have been 4 years since the law was actually signed because they had those whole 6 months where it was like not legal. We're waiting for it to be legal.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a long time. That's a lot of like legislative sessions to not really make things much better.
Yeah. And I was just
Like
gonna say,
they haven't further, I mean, the courts struck down odor as probable cause in cars.
yep.
But other than that, I don't think there's anything the legislature's done to like further decriminalize weed.
Right. And I think there's actually two rulings, which we will definitely be talking about. But there was the ruling for just the odor of raw cannabis, but then I think there was a separate ruling for the odor of burnt cannabis, which is like, hey, hell
I do
yeah,
remember
both
that
bases are
too, yeah.
covered.
But you have to wonder too if cops actually
Yeah.
or the legal system actually observes that at this point.
Well, and that's the point I always try to make when we talk about this. Like, folks, just because we said that, don't just think you can do that, like, and bank on that.
Yeah,
Like,
do not drive around just smoking weed in your car. And not in
right.
this state.
Yeah, absolutely not. Because here's the thing about that, about both cases we just referenced. Like, they could be appealed by the state. This was a local
Oh,
ruling.
that's true. Yeah, I didn't think about that because those are recent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they very well could be appealed. I mean, the court system moves slow as fuck, as we know about with regard to or as I've been learning about with regard to our licensing. As I say, learn, I mean, reminding myself because, while it was all going on, it was admittedly hard to keep track of. And now I look back at it and I'm like, okay, you know, it's interesting how similar it was to light, the original licenses that were issued rather. And by that, I mean, just how many people have connections. You know what I mean? Like, in other words, anybody that knows a lot about Illinois are not like surprised when they see like Phil Stefani's name as a winner.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
People like that. Or, some of these, they just have ties to the existing operators as well. That's another theme that I've noticed. Seems like all the winners are like part of the incubator programs, you know?
Yeah, or like we're established already. I mean, it makes sense. Like, if you're going to start a business, you'll have experience running businesses.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting because like the way this whole thing was pitched is like helping the victims
Cops,
of the war
cops
on
were another
drugs and
big winner.
oh yeah,
Cop,
law
yeah,
enforcement.
yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. You were saying war
Just
on
the
drugs.
reality of the market and
Mhm.
what social equity looks like isn't really like what it was pitched as.
Yeah, and I don't want to like kill our point, but I'm gonna say it right now. Because JB Pritzker brought it up the other day. I feel like I don't know who he was talking to when he said, there are a lot of people that write about. Maybe we should just open up the market because I'm thinking about it. I want to give him a plug again. Great, great journalists out there like Bob McCoppin or Robert McCoppin, Tom Schuba, Mike Fouché, Brad Spearson, Ali Marati. I might be missing a few names. Um, there are definitely good reporters out there. Where the fuck was I going with that? What were we just talking about? I wanted to make sure
Pritzker talking about opening the market.
yeah. So he was saying people write about opening the market. I'm not familiar with any like journalists that are like writing about opening the market. Are you? I mean, there's Don Mc something from MJ Biz who wrote something like maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, but I don't know anybody who's like on the steeple bitching about opening up the market as a journalist. Do you?
Uh, I mean, you can pick up in sometimes when like people write about it, you can kind of pick
Hmm.
up the tone, like, isn't
The
this all a little ridiculous?
fair enough. Fair enough.
I
Okay.
can't point out or like think of an exact example, but I do also think that there's like a general consensus now that you shouldn't cap markets. Like I think
Yeah.
that's a general
But
consensus that I hear from like people who just talk about how to set these things up. And even like that CEO of PharmaCann who was at that Benzinga thing in Chicago a couple months ago, he was like, yeah, I mean, we operate under the assumption that these won't be here someday. Like
mhm,
they're just like a thing of the moment.
yeah. See, but my thing is, I wonder if they are because JB Pritzker and this, I've heard people use this. Like, I agree with you that it feels inevitable, like their battle to keep those things feel futile because ultimately they're artificial creations, that shouldn't exist in the first place.
But it is the law. It would have to change,
It would have
right?
to change,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I want to say this JB Pritzker quote. He's like talking about people that talk about opening up the market, and he says, here's the thing about the way we did it. Since we are issuing, a limited number, that means that operators won't get edged out of the market. They will be able to make money, which will make equity happen, I think is what he said. I'm loosely paraphrasing. We will play the clip when we you know, do the part two. But
Well,
here's my thing.
that was like the rationale when they sold license caps as socially equitable,
Okay, that's
which is a crazy concept. But that was what they like. That was how they argued it back then. Was like, well, we prevent the wholesale prices from collapsing, which allows these people to sell weed at a greater value for longer to get them money to get their businesses up and running. Which is a crazy idea because it's like, okay, so you're pitching social equity as being anti-consumer.
mm-hmm. Well, and that's the question I was going to ask is that like is that the definition of social equity so is the definition of social equity to be able to make a lot of money off of weed, or is the definition of social equity to allow anybody and everybody, including those disproportionately impacted from drugs, like to participate in the market, you know? And like maybe social equity also means, as he pointed out, expungements, right? Stuff like that. Maybe it also means that I think
Well,
you've proposed this idea in the past.
it's funny too because he said he talks about the expungements they made as being one of the great things about the social equity in the bill or the law. And it's like, yeah, but you didn't like expunge or get rid of that many things, and people still go to jail for like some pretty petty offenses.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I'm
So
trying
like,
to,
if you're really embracing that idea that getting rid of these charges for these low level offenders is so great, like, shouldn't you be always moving that bar a little more?
right.
Especially because it's like legal to have pounds and pounds of weed and sell it to people now. It's just like a thing you need a license to do.
Mm-hmm. And that's another story that I don't mean to spoil, but hold on. We'll keep remind me of that having pounds on you. But I wanted to. So we were talking about is that the way for equity? Um, yeah. Oh yeah, I was bringing up those other options because I agree that those are other forms of equity, like righting the wrongs, if that's what our definition of equity is, righting the wrongs. And it's like, okay, yes, expungements are a part of that. Maybe I think you pitched this idea in the past or wrote about it. It's like the idea that non social equity applicants, in other words, if you don't meet the state's definition of social equity, would pay into a fund that would be used to capitalize social equity applicants. Because again, traditionally, that's the thing about it's like
Oh,
this weird
sure.
catch 22 with social equity. So apparently social equity is so that you can make so much fucking money, right, you just said it, you limit it so that you can build
Hmm.
intergenerational wealth. But it's like in order to get that license you have to have already had intergenerational wealth. You can't just be like anybody. You follow me?
Hmm.
So it's like I don't know. That's like the conundrum for me. It's like I don't know. I get so twisted up in the thought that it's like you would just think that the definition of equity would mean, you know,
Well, it just
everybody.
can't, like, you don't need to get twisted. It just can't mean excluding people from starting businesses. It's like
Right,
the
right.
guy, it's like that guy I referred you to that, oh, it's,
Dimitri.
yeah, Dimitri,
Hmm.
from MITA, right? Is that it?
Yep.
MITA?
Yep.
So when he talked about like this idea that every worker deserves the dream or aspiration of starting their own business, like
Yes.
that's that's part of social equity, you know, like
Right.
societal equity and opportunity. And, you know, because even if you're, say, uh, you know, it's not a terrible provision to say you should hire people from these disproportionately impacted areas, you
Hmm.
know, like make that just part of the law. Maybe that shouldn't have allowed you to qualify for the license, but maybe when you had the license, you should have had to do that anyway, you know. But
Right.
uh the idea that those people going to work in the industry would then not be able to dream about starting their own business without having millions of dollars to like buy a license. It's like, well,
Yeah.
what are you really offering them then but a, I mean, there might be room for advancement, but they can never really own their own thing or aspire to like be their own boss, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and to your point, to his point, to both of your since he brought up his point, I think it's funny that one of the things that the companies like will pat themselves on the back about is like, oh, we've got this like they I don't even know what they call, so they got the people under their wing that they're in the incubator program, but then they've got these like training centers. And I'm like, and it's funny because I've heard a little bit of details and it's like, oh, we've got a dispensary mocked up. And it's like, what? So you're gonna teach me how to be a fucking retail like worker? Like, is that's the option?
Like at the children's museum where they have like a mock grocery store.
Yeah, like that's what it sounds like. Maybe it's more than that. Maybe I'm like
It
being,
has to be more than that.
yeah, maybe I'm being like
They're just like, this is the counter. This is the
right.
register.
You got to check people in, check that ID before, like,
Unless it's for teaching children. I don't know.
I don't know. Anyways, again, I'm probably being, I can't even think of the word, but just, I'm probably wrong. I guess is what I'm trying to say. But hey, it took me a while. I found the story that we were referencing. Um, it's do the work going into the next episode is crazy. There's been a lot of research into it. We're up to like fucking 84 pages on that document. I'm gonna have to in
It'll
my
be
analysis.
another Marvel movie length Chillinois
Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah, exactly. But here's the article we were talking about, or the proof to the pudding, that we
Yeah.
were, yeah. So leading Illinois Cannabis Trade Group, for folks that are listening, the headline is leading Illinois Cannabis Trade Group pushing to block bill to aid social equity licensees. So the
You
conflict
know,
was
and that's,
spurred. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, it'll be interesting, you know, because like, you know, we've talked about how Ambrose from like 1937 Group has joined their board, you know, but I've
Hmm.
still seen him speak his mind about, you know, the stuff
Yeah,
that's wrong in the industry and really like saying the right things as far as I would consider them. Um, so it'll be interesting because it would seem like he hasn't signed any kind of like thing that restricts him from speaking his mind.
yeah, yeah. I hope that he
Maybe as people, I don't know, like maybe enough people can join that organization to make it not be fucked.
right. Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I
Is
hope
it?
that he, because he, in my conversations with him, he seems to understand it, and maybe he's approaching this strategically, and that's my hope, at least. God willing, let's hope that time proves us right. Because that would suck if he went to the dark
Well,
side.
and well, yeah, but you do need to survive. Like if
Well,
you
and
got
that's a
one of these
point you
licenses
made.
and you're
Yeah.
trying to make it go, you know, you do need to survive. And, you
Yep.
know, I wouldn't like, yeah, I don't know. It's funny because I think we'll talk about a couple of the new dispensaries and who owns them and maybe some of the stuff that they've done. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It's tough to
Yeah.
judge people in the market, but there's some people who have gotten in that clearly are just like, what?
Hmm. Yeah, I guess what you're trying to say is I'm not trying to, if Ambrose is listening right now, I'm trying not trying to litmus test anybody or whatever.
Yeah, right.
Um, I'm just we watch all these things and we enjoy paying attention to these things. And frankly, we just pulled up, that article shows that ICANN has a history of, not only lobbying against, in this specific case, they were lobbying against craft cultivators, but they have a history from the news articles that I've found. One specifically mentions that it was opposition from the police and licensed cultivators regarding home grow. So, you know, um, I'm just
Um,
saying that's
and
a
I will
problem for
say
me.
among
Yeah.
new operators, I will feel free to talk shit about companies that have like former regulators working in them and former law enforcement working in them
Yeah.
or owning them
Yeah.
because that shit's
E-
just wild.
exactly. So again, I just want to reiterate, not trying to, you know, I'm not trying to be the judge of anybody or litmus test anybody, but I am watching, and I find all this stuff interesting, and so I just hope that things would go in the way that I would prefer them to, right? Just like anybody else. Everybody wants to have their way, right?
Well, yeah, and I think in Illinois cannabis, I would just love to see more of this stuff talked about,
Yeah.
you know?
And I truly believe that some of the things that we are talking about, the points that we make, if anybody's going to say we have any agenda in this, it's not that you and I are directly going to benefit from it other than having access to more cannabis. It's not like I will like I have no plans to open a dispensary or get, Chillinois
Yeah,
weed or anything like that. Like I have no plans. I continue to just
good.
stick with this microphone and talk to fucking prostitutes and Satanists and stuff like that, you know.
Well, and that's what we've talked about is like a lot of people involved with Illinois cannabis have some involvement with the industry of Illinois cannabis. Like
Mhm.
if they're talking about it, they're probably like invested in it or wanting to get into it or
Right.
working in it or something like that. So we are outsiders. We're just nerds that like to pay attention to it.
Yeah. Well, and we wonder why are things the way they are. That's how this whole, like, if you want to call it a series on the history of cannabis started. We wondered why are things the way they are. We got on the internet and we never said anything that we said was like, this is the truth. We just said, hey, we read this on the internet. And what else are we supposed to think? Without being told directly. When you're forced to fill in the gaps, what the fuck else am I supposed to do? You know?
Well, right. Yeah.
The
Like there
state
is.
could easily take control of this narrative if they would just come out and own it and
Oh,
be
yeah.
like, you know what I'm saying? But
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
we're all left to
Well, and I
guess.
don't think Illinois deserves the benefit of the doubt. I don't, that's what one thing I think is funny is like you'll hear just cannabis users say, like, oh, well, they're trying their best or they tried their best or blah, blah, blah. It's like, really? Like, you're going to give them the benefit of the doubt that this wasn't the result of corruption? This wasn't like they didn't just do a really shitty job
Well,
or they don't care or,
here's one thing that I could see being, it's a small critique on our episode, but on our original episode, I could see a small critique being made by Pamela Altoff because I listened to an interview with her. And she said, everybody says that this was a result, just 6 months in the state legislature, which is true. I mean, when it comes down to it. But also it is important. And if you look at our final document that we're going to publish, there was talk about adult use legalization before 2019, but our point was when you have control like they had control at the time, if we're recalling correctly, they had the House, the Senate, and the governor, you know, when you have that control, maybe you just take a little bit more time before you like run past your finish line, what you deem as your finish line. Maybe you take more public comment. Maybe you will, allow elected officials to comment on things. That's another reference to the first episode.
Well, I think
Carol
we talked
Ammons.
about that before. Like it was very rushed.
Again, yes, absolutely. But I was just bringing up the point that I think if anybody was going to make a critique of our episode, I've heard Pamela Altoff say,
It'll be
she's
like,
like,
well, we had to
oh,
get it done in 6 months.
right. She'll say
It's like,
something like that.
well, maybe that was the wrong goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we didn't need to have commercial sales just yet. Maybe we could have just focused on decriminalizing it.
Oh yeah,
You
for
know,
sure.
like we were
I mean,
so hell
I
bent
mean,
on
I would,
having stores open,
yeah. I
you
mean,
know?
I would rather have like an Oklahoma style medical market, like they
Right.
still are. I mean, that would even be more accessible to a larger portion of the population.
Yeah, and what's sad is that I was reading in our research that we'll dive deeper in on, but do you recall this? It's like there was an event back in the day where they kind of did in Illinois kind of a farmers market style cannabis, and there was no problems with it. Like people reported on it, but it just never happened again. Do you recall
Where
that?
was that? I do not recall that.
Trying to find it right now. And of course, since I'm trying to find it, it's going to take me 30 minutes like the last one because I don't have this all laid out in a nice little script like I had last time. But
Like it was
off
like a,
oh, here it is.
it was like an,
Windy City Smoke Up offered safe space to get stoned, sell unregulated weed. This is one step closer to what I wish we could do everywhere. I'll put this on the screen here in
what's the
just a
date
second.
on that?
2021, December 5th, 2021. I'm gonna share my screen right now. Um, So here it is. Tom Shuba, shout out.
Oh, I
Um,
do vaguely recall
oh,
this.
it's Don Brown. Yeah, I remember this now. I remember everybody was like, "Oh, Don Brown is." I don't. Is he like a musician or something, or
I think just a media personality, if I had to
just somebody
guess.
in? Okay,
Maybe he was in a band or something.
gotcha.
But
Oh, it's Afro Man. That's. I was like, I feel like there was music there. Afro Man was there. Yeah,
it's interesting there were sales going on though.
yeah. Let's see. Allowed open weed consumption. Was billed as a cannabis expo with live art and music. Afro Man was there. Various black market pot products similar to those found at the state's highly regulated dispensary were being sold. Yeah, be cool
Well, I
if
mean, this stuff happens like all over, especially in a city like Chicago. Um,
yeah. I was just telling you,
I can't imagine they're rating enough of them to have a chilling effect on that kind of thing. But I know, like I've read about, like we talked about before, that one shop that was having like vendors in there was
mhm,
raided and the people were arrested. So obviously there's still enforcement going on even in Chicago.
right. I wonder who you got to wonder who calls that in. Because it's got to be somebody that knows enough about cannabis that's like that's not a license. Like, is it
I would
is it?
assume if it's being found out and like cracked down on, that it's been reported to them. Like
But
I
that's
don't
my
know
thing.
that. Yeah.
Who's the type of person to report that? Because I sure wouldn't. Like, is it just like that you find it accidentally and you're like,
I mean,
hey, why is a
well,
dispensary in our town? Like, because think about that. There's some places that you have to vote for shit like that, and some
well,
people
or
really pay
any
attention to that.
number. I mean, you could think any number of people who are affiliated with the regulated market might take that as an insult.
True. That's kind of
They
what I
stumble
was
upon it or
thinking.
hear about
Yeah.
it. There's like tens of thousands of people that are affiliated with, work in the industry. So,
Yeah. I mean, when I asked that question, I was kind of thinking, yeah, like somebody that, because like who else really would care,
well, I mean,
you
did you
know?
see on Reddit? I think yesterday or the day before, someone posted something about buying a cart from Michigan at like a head shop here in
Mm.
Illinois. And it's like there's no identifying information there, but it's like people, I could just see people being so excited to get a deal on anything that word just gets out like so widely, like, and the penalties are just so harsh for that kind of thing. You have to wonder if the person who's doing that knows what they're doing.
Right. Right. Well,
Like we're not
yeah.
California. Like if like people who run the illegal dispensaries out there, like I've always heard like there's never like a jail penalty for them.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that definitely happens around here, you know.
Well, that's part I mean, because you would think if the penalties were like way, way, way less, and they had established this market as they have,
Mm-hmm.
it would be like New York is, you know?
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, you just made me, you remember I told you I had something to say about having pounds? You just made me think of it because that's kind of
Hmm.
how they charge you when you get fucking caught running one of these illegal shops. You get charged with as much as you have, and then that's all this, it's this graduated punishment that started in 1978, as we found in episode number 232 that everybody should check out. Um, so one of the things I think I asked you in episode 232 or the one before that was, you remember I kind of float, maybe it wasn't with you, I don't know, so I get so stoned and talk to some different people, I forget who I talked to what about, but I think it was with you, and I said, how do these vendors get all the cannabis to these different things they're doing, where it's like, you know what I'm saying, like where it's like, oh, here's the sample of our joints, but it's like they
Oh,
got a lot of
yeah,
weed.
yeah,
And I'm like, but how
yeah.
do you do that? So I actually found an article where one company explains how they do it. And of course, I should have, before I said that, brought the article up, but I just remembered that I had that to say.
You would almost
So
think some of the transport license people would be complaining that they're not being employed to transport that stuff to these
this is why
events.
I bring that up, because this is how they explained it. I'm going to go off the top of my head, and in the episode part 2, I will make goddamn sure that we cover this base. But I'll just give you what I can remember off the top of my head right now. They said, because they were specifically asked, how did you get around that? The same question we asked. And they said they had several of their employees purchase their amount and bring it to the location over a matter of several days,
Interesting.
which is technically, I'm not a lawyer, but I
It
would
seems
say
like
that
that would
none
be
of the,
technically legal.
okay, yeah, and I agree with you there. I agree with you. But then when all the cannabis is in one spot, I agree with you that several transactions aren't illegal, but you're collecting it in one spot. Who is in possession of that one spot that it's collected in? I don't
Yeah.
know. You just get into this weird area. And I'm not a fucking proponent for possession limits at all, but I'm just saying we're all
Oh
playing by
no.
the same
But that's why
rules,
they're so funny, right? Is
Bingo.
like at some point one person is in possession of many pounds of weed.
Right.
Like why are
Right.
they so special?
Mm-hmm.
I get like they might work for a licensed company, but like I don't know, it just seems like such a silly thing.
It
And like
really is.
you've talked about it before, like the transport requirements in Illinois. Like
Yeah,
I was saying, like,
that's an
oh, how are they
article that I gotta find. I could not find this article, but I swear,
it was like
folks,
a
if you're,
newscast. It was like a local newscast about the transporting opioids.
yes, you know what I'm
Yeah,
talking about.
yeah,
It's
yeah. Because
somewhere.
it's crazy. Like I think if people like if legislators were presented with that, like, come on, you gotta
Yeah, dude, we have to find that video for that, and I'll make it into a reel. And
like you can have a cannabis transporter license, but maybe they don't need front and back facing cameras and to be armed.
right. So yeah, for folks that aren't sure what we're talking about, do you mind explaining how they compared the cannabis delivery, how it works with opioids, and how it's just so fucking crazy and different?
Well, it was just like the opioids were allowed to be driven around in a car,
That's what I
like
loved. They
just
just
to
threw it in the passenger seat,
yeah, like a
like a bag of,
pharmaceutical rep can just drive around with like bags of these pills like in their car.
yeah,
You know,
like
tons and
right
tons
next
of
to
these
them.
samples. Yeah.
But meanwhile, here's the distinction for folks that are like, why is that crazy? Meanwhile, cannabis has to be in the back, but not only in the back, in a separate locked like enclosure. So, you've got the back of your van, right? And it's an enclosure. But then you have to have a box within the van that has a lock on it. Am I wrong in my memory on that? I'm pretty
No,
sure
I
that that's the way it is.
think that is right. And they're also like recorded where they go and tracked, and they're not allowed to deviate from their route.
I feel
Like there's a
like
lot of crazy things like that.
they're tracked like probably the closest thing to somebody who's transporting a weapon of some sort, like a weapon that could hurt society. you know.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I mean, you feel bad for them because a lot of people applied for those licenses and invested in those requirements and were stuck with zero business.
Yeah.
So it would be nice if they could at least get delivery, although that would just continue to benefit existing operators.
Yeah, it is funny though that the one license, and I think you made this point last time, the one license that basically has no utility is the one that's unlimited. Like they were like, yeah, I mean, sure, you can have as many of
Well,
those shit ass fucking licenses as you want,
mhm. Well, and
you
now I
know?
think isn't there a moratorium even on those?
Oh, there is? Okay.
I think they did. I think
Oh
they
yeah, you know
instituted a
what?
moratorium on those
They closed
for like
accepting them.
for like
Right.
3 or 5 years or something like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. But yeah,
Really, what
dude,
they should do with them is allow those people, because I thought those transporters had to have like some kind of like a warehouse space. I thought they had to have somewhere they were like operating out of. They should
that
just
would
let
make
them
sense. Like
like,
a distribution center, kind of,
well,
you
they
know?
should let them, because I know this is something they've done in other states to like reduce the overhead, is like let those transporters just run their own dispensaries out of their delivery business. Like,
Yeah.
don't make them just a delivery for existing dispensaries. Like, allow them to buy their own supply from the people, the cultivators, and then just allow them to run their business just as a solely delivery business.
Yeah. And like maybe even let the infusers buy product. But then of course there's that whole thing, isn't it? Am I right in thinking that the infusers have to buy oil? They can't buy the product and like blow it themselves, like extract it themselves.
Yes. Yeah. They
So
have to buy. Yeah.
so
So
that's
they're
like
just
another
buying.
basically worthless license in my opinion.
It's kind of a crazy situation. Yeah. I think
I don't
that's
mean to
why
say
you
it's
see
worthless,
like,
but
well, I think it's obviously not worthless.
it's
But
worth something if you have the cultivation license as well. How about that? Or you're really tight with
I
somebody
think
that has a
wouldn't a
cultivation license.
wouldn't a cultivator be able to infuse?
Actually, I think you're right because I think I talked to
Because that's why
somebody
it's
that
that's why
said
it's kind of funny.
I think actually, you know what? 1937 group did an interview with I think Block some on the Block Chicago or something like that. I feel bad for not being able to give the actual podcast name, but there's no way I'm going to be able to pull it up right now. Anyways, they did an interview with a guy that I didn't get the chance to talk to. I wish I could because he seemed super cool and just like smart and funny. But he was talking about how, yeah, when they were looking at which licenses to apply for, they saw that the infuser, you know, couldn't extract, but that the craft could extract and infuse. And they're like, well, why the fuck would you get an infuser license? I'm pretty sure that's what he
Yeah.
said. You know, they kind of looked at
Maybe
it that way.
maybe it was just easier to get one. But I think that's why you're going to see a lot of those infusers like that company Wild coming to Illinois. They're like a more premium, like if I see them in a dispensary in Michigan, they're like a more premium edible. They like cost a little more than like all the other cheaper options. So I feel like that's kind of like the play. It's like you'll license with kind of a known brand from out of state, be able to charge a little more. The annoying thing though is that you're really just trading on that brand because you're selling the same distillate that everyone else has in their, or at least Cresco or GTI or whoever you're buying that from is putting in theirs.
Yeah. Well, another thing I want to figure out that I think we, it's totally kind of a separate topic, but this is just kind of what we're doing today. We'll probably wrap up here soon so that we can do a quick rundown of my research, and click out for the night. But we were talking about like what it takes to open a consumption lounge. And to me it's crazy, you like hear about all these different events that want to have consumption in it. And I think maybe it's the complication is like Chicago and you got to have the approvals or whatever, but it's weird that it seems like the only consumption lounge in Chicago is that one, at Rise or whatever.
Well,
But then
Rise is way out in the suburbs.
okay, sorry, I
Like,
refer to it as Chicago collectively as a
well,
from
but it's
yeah.
not even like, I mean, I would term where I am. I live way down on the south side in an area called Beverly. I would quantify this as the suburbs, but it's technically still Chicago.
Yeah.
Mundelein, where Rise is like halfway to Wisconsin. Like it's like
S-
pretty far out there.
See, I'm glad you say this because I already know that people that are from Chicago that are listening, when I said that, they're like, what the fuck is he talking about? This isn't in
It's the
Chicago.
Chicago area, but it's like the edge of it, you know?
Sure, sure.
Yeah, it
But
is interesting that that's like the one that's up here.
it's the one, and like I just let me contrast that. And it's not like this is a crazy contrast. It's not, like when you contrast the number of dispensaries in Illinois versus the dispensaries in Denver, like that's a crazy contrast. um this isn't nearly as dramatic, not even close. So there's one in Chicago, there's two in Southern Illinois, but still there's two, and they're not dispensaries. I'm
Well,
pretty
it's
sure.
also like, I wouldn't even be surprised if more opened up in suburbs versus Chicago if Chicago is the issue for opening these things, because, there's just like there'd be more municipalities in the surrounding areas. You're like dealing with different towns, different communities. So there you'd have more of a chance of a random one being like, sure, you can open up here, versus all of Chicago, the city council or whoever has to decide on what those policies are to allow people to open them.
Yeah. I'm glad we did this conversation and recorded this conversation because, I try to repeat throughout the show that we do citation, we try to do the citations, but that's not like the end of it. You should do your own research and come to your own opinions. But I feel like it's good for people to see this back and forth. Like we're both asking each other open questions about things we've
Oh yeah,
thought
we
about
definitely
and
don't
we
know
don't know the
everything.
answer. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. We have
No,
opinions
it's
about,
well,
the ways we think.
it's such a complicated issue. Like I don't think everyone could know. There's not anyone that could know everything about these issues.
Yeah. And surely I mean, most definitely, no doubt about it, we have our own opinions about certain concepts, let's say, that we do not falter from, and we can name them easily, license caps, home grow, possession limits, it should be basically treated like smoking a cigarette, which is like, but I mean, by that, I mean, have the fucking common courtesy not to do it next to people that don't like how it smell. But I know that people don't always do that with cigarettes. So, but again, it should just be treated like cigarettes. You can smoke them basically anywhere.
But
That's what I'm trying to say.
regulated like coffee.
And regulated like coffee. There you go. That I think that's in a nutshell, like kind of our belief system. But at the end of the day, we're always asking open questions, and we're kind of, again, the whole spirit of the history thing is like, what else are we supposed to do other than fill in the gaps? The state has not communicated very clearly at all, and when they do, you know it's like they're not like the whole equity thing we were talking about with JB Pritzker. It's like he's not even having the same conversation.
Well, and that's yeah, like that was one of the reasons we talked about wanting to do it was just like let's like go through the history of all this stuff just for people who do find it interesting, because I feel like if you're interested in Illinois cannabis and you just pay attention to it contemporaneously, like as we're going
Yes.
along, you could really lose sight of like why this is all so fucked up is because it all started really fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
And the influences have been really messed up the whole time. And like no one's really, there are no consumer advocates, you know? Like I would love to see like a group like Illinois Normal really like strike up for consumers,
Mm-hmm.
and like pick a fight for consumers, because Illinoisans are just get fucked by the market and
Yeah.
by our legislators keeping things the way they are, by people still going to prison, by us not having, only being allowed to grow 5 plants as a medical patient and not being allowed to really grow anything as non-medical. It's all just messed up.
Yeah. And something I learned, just again, just since we're having a fun little smoke sesh being random, something I learned this week is that Normal started in Illinois. Did you also learn that?
Oh yeah, I did learn that this week.
Yeah. So that was pretty cool. I didn't know that. But
It's cool, but isn't that also such a weird dichotomy?
right.
Normal started in Illinois, and we have one of the most like corporate, anti-consumer, still criminalized markets.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
Should be raising hell about this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, man. Exactly. You know, I think you said it earlier. Like, what makes those people any different? You know, like why are they allowed to travel around with, you know, untold quantities of cannabis? Meanwhile, if I get just one little hair over the fucking limit, I'm a criminal. You know,
Hmm.
um, it's not even a talk about like, oh, hey, that's a compliance violation. Like, no, it's you're going to fucking jail because you have too much weed. You know, so
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I also wonder, like, I mean, someone would have to like actually go to trial and try this, but I wonder if you could try like jury nullification as a strategy in certain communities in Illinois. Just be like, look, we know this is still illegal and that he had pounds of weed on him, but do you really want to send someone to jail for this? Because I'm pretty sure that is like a strategy. I've heard about that before. Like that's how that New Jersey weed man got off when he was like charged with running an unlicensed dispensary.
I wish we heard more stories like that, though, you know, here in Illinois. But maybe we just got to start looking for
Well,
it. I don't know how you
usually
find
if
those
you're
stories.
charged with something, usually if you're charged with something that's going to send you to jail for many, many years, you take a plea deal and you don't actually go to trial, you
Yeah.
know? So someone, if you're going to go to trial and you're going to try to like do that kind of a strategy, if you lose, they're going to be like, okay, you're going to jail for life so
Right,
that no one
right.
ever tries that again.
You want to fuck with me? You're going to jail for
I
life.
mean, yeah, the legal system does make examples of people.
Hmm. Hell yeah. So yeah, folks, that is all to say. Look out for part 2 of History of Illinois Cannabis. I hope you get where we're coming from. If you haven't checked out episode number 1 for the 500th time, I'm sorry I've said it so much, but I really think it's important. Like you said, Phil, just a little bit ago, and I think you said it in the first episode. It helps people see the trees from the forest. I think we did a really good job of just kind of wisping high level. And I'm sure that maybe we can rope in some other experts or the people that reported. That's actually a plan I have. Let's fill in the gaps a little bit. I'm sure there's some gaps,
Oh,
you
I
know, and
would,
I'm sure
yeah, that
maybe
would
the
be
way
super
I
interesting.
editorialized it or the way we had commentary on it, maybe it wasn't that it's wrong, but it's like, you know, also consider this, you know, I'm
Well,
sure.
or you could actually talk to people who were there.
Yes, that's a plan for sure. I mean, Marianne Lawn Car, and we didn't mention that in the first episode. So for folks that watched the first episode and are maybe looking for little bonus tidbits or something, we'll, you know, we'll revisit it. And Marianne's talked about it on our show in the past, but you know, one of the main sponsors, I mean, it's on page 1 here of of the report or the analysis we produced. Lou Lang, you know, was the main person that pushed for the medical cannabis. I can't speak. I'm so high at this point. Lou Lang pushed for medical cannabis originally. It passed. He was, you know, a champion of this issue for quite some time. And then Mariam Lawn Car, which you can Google this, folks, if you know, if you want to learn more. Google Marianne Lawn Car, Lou Lang. You will find results, and you will quickly figure out what it's all about. Um, so Lou Lang ultimately ended up stepping down from whatever leadership position he was in with the Madigan. So I don't know how all that
I
shit
think he
worked
was
back in
like
the
a
day.
big deal in the house, but
Yeah,
she
that's what I was
accused
gonna
him
say.
of
He
like,
was like part of Madigan's, like, I don't know. I read some reporting because again, I'm really trying to learn more about all of this stuff. There's a lot to Illinois politics and everything else. But at the time, as I understood it, you know, Madigan was like the powerhouse, and he was part of this like group. I don't know, some like some group, and he said he
a
stepped out of
cabal.
that. Yeah, basically, but it was like it had like an official term because again, if you look up this coverage, you'll see this, folks. So definitely do that. He says, you know, I'm just stepping down because I don't want, you know, unnecessary attention on Mike Madigan. I wonder why he was worried about unnecessary attention on Mike Madigan. No, I'm just fucking around. Um, but yeah, so the thing that I was confused about, the reason I just said that is because I thought he like stepped down entirely, but when I actually researched it, I found that he just stepped down from like whatever that commission or whatever the fuck the name is. I'm so high I
Oh,
can't.
he didn't fully resign from.
I don't believe so. Like I believe he ended
Interesting.
up not running again, but I don't believe like I believe he and maybe I'm wrong. So that's why I'm going to say again,
Well,
folks
he
look
might
it
have
up.
just said he wasn't running again, resigned from some leadership position. Like,
That's
could have been some kind of
basically
compromise. But the thing I think is interesting about that story, I think I might have said this before, was just that she accused him in that story of the sexual harassment stuff, and then also of there being some kind of bribe situation of like $170 million offered to like cap licenses or like do something with restricting the market in someone's favor.
yeah, it's pretty
But
nuts.
I
And
just
I
think it's
mean,
funny. It's like one of those claims was valid enough to get like results, but oh, the other one, like no one believes that.
it's outlandish. No, and that's actually how he responded to it. So to for Lou Lang, if Lou's watching, Lou basically responded that to that and said something to the effect, again, folks, look it up, but I'm gonna do my rendition. He was like, well shit. If that money is if I've got that money, somebody better tell me where that money is because I fucking, I need that money, right? The whole thing where it's like you've heard that before, right? Like, well, if I misplaced $1 million, I'd love for somebody to tell me
Right.
where it
Yeah.
is because, right. Anyways,
Yeah, she would be an interesting one to talk to.
yeah, yeah. Again, for folks that didn't know, we had her on once, but we definitely need to have her on again because that venue wasn't necessarily conducive to like intimate conversations like we like to have on
Well,
here.
but she's also been around since like she was lobbying for medical stuff back in the late 2000s, 2010, like back when Lou Lang started talking about this stuff. So she would, I think, just have a lot of insight, into things that we've talked about.
Yeah, I actually saw a show she went on recently, and she was talking about the proposals before 2013, and that's one of the things that I was kind of, if you recall, like I remember I had like some analysis that indicated that well, excuse me, Lou Lang, the sponsor at the time, had there was potential to pass a cannabis bill in 2009, but from what I can gather, and it's hard, I'm really like, again, from what I can gather, it seems like the timing worked out just about right to where that's when the whole controversy with Blagojevich happened, and so I think it just like
Oh, I could see that. Yeah.
but I could be wrong on that. It was really hard for me to try to figure it out, but just from what I could tell, I'm like, I don't know what else happened here because they were saying, I mean, he was quoted as saying that
I feel like
uh
Blagojevich was like later than that, though.
so what I was going to say is that the Compassionate Use of Medical Cannabis Pilot Program Act passed the Illinois State Senate on May 27th, 2009. That's in our original document, episode 232. Um, with an election year on the horizon, sponsor Lou Lang didn't see a lot of potential for the bill to pass. And it looks like I've got a citation for that. So definitely check that out. I found a speech where he was trying to make the case. But like I say, that's in 2009 where
Oh yeah,
Governor Quinn.
he was charged in December 2008.
Oh shit. Well then,
Blagojevich. So yeah.
yeah. I mean, yeah, I could see how that would go out the window because Governor Quinn took governorship from Blagojevich in January of 2009, actually. So I don't know what happened in between that year.
Because didn't we talk about like didn't Quinn kind of inherit the whole program?
Well, he didn't inherit the program, actually. Bruce Rauner did. Bruce
Oh,
Rauner
right, right,
inherited the
right. Yeah,
program.
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
And the whole weird thing
No, it
again,
originated under Quinn, yeah.
right? It originated under Quinn. He hesitated to make any choices up
What's
until the
really
very last day. You remember? Like
what's
it was
really
like,
funny What's really funny though is that if Rod Blagojevich had been the governor and it had originated under him, can you imagine how how much more we would have been like Florida?
right. Oh, absolutely. And by that you mean tell folks what you're
Oh,
if they're not familiar.
you'd have like three vertically integrated companies that own everything. You'd have like, 50 of one dispensary all around the state.
Yeah. quick recap for folks who haven't heard 232. Quinn had the Cannabis Act got passed. He ultimately was like there was a licensing process happening. There were some accusations made, and he all the way up until the last day, the last hours before leaving the office, was making changes to allegedly and talking with Representative Bob Morgan, according to emails, trying to figure out, well, should we push this? We should just push this, right? We should push it. Well, maybe not. I don't know about the optics of it. And so they ultimately opted to pass it off to Bruce Rauner, who again alleged corruption, blah, blah, blah. Ultimately, like I said, some of those things were released, and if you want to see them, check out the document in episode 232. You can actually see the documents themselves from the Quinn administration. Ultimately, this is the craziest thing for me still. I want to hear your take on this. I can't remember what you said in 232, but I think it's crazy that that Rauner moved forward with the process that he was criticizing. Did he end up getting paid off too? You just have to wonder.
I mean,
Again, I don't know what else to
he's pretty phenomenally wealthy, so I'm sure it was just a damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. You know what? And I actually think there may have been some, like you say, just kind of pressure on it, because if you think about,
well, and if the state's gonna probably get sued, no matter what they do, maybe his lawyers were like, well, if you just let him go, you'll get sued less.
well, and actually, I believe he said, and I think it's cited in the document now that I'm thinking about it, and I've asked you this question. I believe that during the campaign, he said, although I don't agree that, cannabis was legalized, it is the will of the people, and I will honor the will of the people, basically, is what he said. And so, but then, it was, yeah, so that's kind of his approach. And then he was like, well, maybe we should do it as a bidding process, because Illinois needs money. Maybe we should make it pay for play. And it was like, okay.
I mean, it essentially was and is.
It was and is, yeah. But anyways, we don't gotta dive deep into that rabbit hole again.
We'll get into that. We'll get into that later.
Yeah, we'll get into that. So, well, for folks that tuned into this episode, I hope you hung with us, and I hope you at least found some value. If you've not checked out episode 232, do it, and stay tuned for part 2, where the plan is to start a little bit before adult use. We'll clarify when we first actually started talking about it. Because I think it was sometime in actually 2017 that Kelly Cassidy went on the radio and was like, yeah, dude, we could do adult use cannabis. But again, nothing ended up actually happening until 2019. So we'll get into all that. We'll start a little bit before adult use cannabis, aka recreational cannabis, aka legal weed, as we call it. And if you're watching, I did the air quotes there because we don't believe it's legal until you can grow, buy, possess, use, ingest as much as you want, need, or please. And I said use and ingest, which mean the same thing. Whatever. So yeah, we'll start with adult, a little bit before adult use, and we'll go up to modern day. I'm talking, December, whatever it is when we record it. We'll try to make it up to literally that day. So yeah, we'll be talking
Let's hope for a big story we can end on.
Yeah, let's hope for some zinger that comes out. JB Pritzker's like, fuck it, let's open up the licensing. I'm just joking.
Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah, you can grow at home, you can have farmers markets. That's a dream.
You just close out the podcast and call it a day.
I'd be like, well, I mean, shit, all
my
the
work
problems
is done here.
Yeah, I was gonna say all the problems we were bitching about have been solved. So folks, I don't know
you
if
could
there's
just
going to
move,
be another
you could just
one.
you could just move on to harder drugs sooner.
Exactly. We can move on to the next, mushrooms, and then, we'll just keep going. Gateway, just proving the people right. It's a gateway drug. So I joke, I kid, folks. All right. We'll see you next time on the Chillinois podcast. See ya.